Am I wrong to sell my daughter's friend's ticket? I've always been a firm believer in creating memories with my daughter. At just 12 years old, she's at that perfect age where she's full of wonder and excitement about the world. So when she told me about this concert for her favorite artist, I knew it would be something special for her. I wasn't familiar with the performer myself, but I could see how much it meant to her. The concert wasn't cheap, far from it. But after some back and forth, I decided to splurge. The tickets were $400 each, which stung a bit, but I told myself it would be worth it to see her happy. However, there was one concern. I wasn't comfortable sending her alone. After all, she's still so young, and these events can get chaotic. That's when the idea of taking her best friend came up. Her friend's mother and I had a casual conversation about the concert months ago. I mentioned I was planning to buy tickets and asked if she might want to do the same for her daughter. She hesitated, mentioning the price and the worry of sending her child alone. I offered to take both girls, thinking it would be a fun experience for them and reassuring for her. She seemed relieved, and I figured we were on the same page. If I bought the tickets, she'd pay me back for her daughters. With that plan in place, I went ahead and purchased 3 tickets. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It felt like a generous but reasonable thing to do. Little did I know this decision would spark weeks of frustration and leave me questioning everything. Once I had decided to buy the tickets, the first thing I did was check online to ensure I could get 3 seats together. The concert was already generating buzz, and I knew tickets wouldn't last long. After navigating through a frustratingly slow ticketing site and refreshing the page a dozen times, I finally secured 3 seats. The price, the $200 in total, was still gnawing at me, but I reassured myself it was an investment in a memory that would last a lifetime. I didn't hesitate to let the other mom know I'd made the purchase. I sent her a message, explaining that I'd secured seats for her daughter and mine alongside my own. Her initial response was warm and enthusiastic. She thanked me for taking the initiative, and even called me a lifesaver for handling the ticket buying process. I took this as confirmation that she understood her responsibility to pay me back for her daughter's share. Over the following days, I noticed she didn't mention the payment. I figured she might be waiting until her next payday or something. It didn't strike me as a big deal at first. I decided to wait a bit before bringing it up, thinking it would happen naturally. Meanwhile, my daughter couldn't stop talking about the concert. She was picking out outfits, sharing her favorite songs, and planning how they'd spend the day together. Seeing her excitement reinforced my belief that this was worth the cost. I imagined how thrilled both girls would be on the day of the show, singing along and creating memories they'd talk about for years. But as the weeks turned into months, that initial gratitude from the other mom started to fade. She became harder to reach, dodging my calls and responding vaguely to my texts. It was frustrating but also confusing. Did she really think I wouldn't follow up on a $400 ticket? As the days turned into weeks, I decided it was time to gently remind the other mom about the ticket payment. I sent her a friendly text, casually mentioning that I had covered her daughter's ticket and asking when would be a good time for her to pay me back. I didn't expect this to be an issue, considering how appreciative she had been when I first told her about securing the seats. Her response, however, was less than encouraging. She vaguely mentioned being busy and promised to get back to me soon. I didn't want to push too hard, so I gave her the benefit of the doubt and waited. A week passed, then another, and still no payment. I reached out again, this time with a more direct tone, reminding her of the cost and that I had paid up front with the expectation of being reimbursed. She responded with an excuse about unexpected expenses that had come up. While I sympathized to some extent, life happens after all. It was starting to feel like she wasn't prioritizing the payment. By this point, I was getting frustrated. I wasn't trying to make a profit or be unreasonable. I just wanted her to cover her part of the deal. The longer this went on, the more it felt like I was being taken advantage of. Yet, I didn't want to escalate things, especially since our daughters were close friends. Each time I tried to bring it up, she either brushed it off or didn't reply at all. It was becoming clear that I'd need to decide how far I was willing to let this slide before drawing a line. As months rolled by, the excuses from the other mom became more frequent and more creative. One week it was car troubles. The next, unexpected medical bills. While I understood that life could be unpredictable, her consistent evasiveness felt deliberate. What bothered me most wasn't just the lack of payment, but the lack of communication. She started dodging my calls entirely, letting them go straight to voicemail, and her texts became shorter, often non-committal. I began to question myself. Was I overreacting? Should I just let it go? But every time I thought about it, I came back to the same conclusion. This wasn't a small favor. It was $400. It wasn't just about the money either. It was about the principle. I had stepped up to do something kind and reasonable, expecting nothing more than what we had agreed upon. Yet here I was, stuck footing the bill for her daughter. I decided to speak with my daughter about it. I explained the situation in simple terms, careful not to make her feel responsible or upset. I asked her if she had noticed anything unusual with her friend. Maybe there was something going on at home that we didn't know about. My daughter shook her head, saying everything seemed normal. She even added that her friend had been talking about the concert as if she were going, which made me feel even worse. I finally told my daughter that I was considering not taking her friend if her mom didn't pay. To my surprise, she agreed, saying it wasn't fair for them to take advantage of us. She even reassured me, I'll still have fun, even if it's just the two of us. Hearing that from her was a relief. It gave me the confidence to move forward with setting a boundary. I decided it was time to be firm. No more waiting, no more excuses. After months of trying to resolve the issue quietly, I knew I had to involve my daughter more directly. It wasn't a conversation I wanted to have, but it felt necessary. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, I carefully explained the situation. I told her about the ticket, the cost, and how her friend's mom hadn't paid me back despite my repeated attempts to reach her. At first, she seemed surprised. I didn't know her mom hadn't paid, she said. I could tell she was processing everything. I reassured her that the problem wasn't her friend's fault and that I valued their friendship. But I also explained that it wasn't fair for us to be taken advantage of, especially when I had made the terms clear from the beginning. Her response surprised me. "It's okay if she doesn't come, Mom," she said, her tone understanding yet firm. "I'd rather it just be us than have her come if her mom isn't being fair to you." I asked if she thought her friend knew about the situation. She shrugged. "I don't think so. She's been talking about the concert like she's going." "But I get it. You're doing the right thing." Her maturity in that moment caught me off guard. While it didn't erase the awkwardness of the situation, it reassured me that my daughter understood the importance of fairness. She didn't hold it against me, which was my biggest fear. If anything, she seemed more disappointed in her friend's mom than anything else. This conversation solidified my decision. With my daughter's support, I felt confident moving forward. It was time to stop waiting for a response and take the next step, setting a clear deadline and making my stance known. With the concert just a couple of weeks away, I knew it was now or never. I needed to give the other mom one last chance to do the right thing. I sat down and drafted a firm but polite text message. I kept it short and clear. "I've been trying to reach you for months regarding the $400 ticket for her daughter. If I don't receive payment by the end of this week, I won't be able to take her to the concert, and I'll have to sell the ticket to recoup the cost." I reread the message several times before hitting send. My goal was to be as direct as possible without sounding confrontational. I wanted her to understand that this wasn't about pettiness. It was about fairness. Days passed, and I heard nothing. No reply, no acknowledgement, nothing. I checked my phone obsessively, hoping for a response that never came. It felt disrespectful, almost as if she was banking on me caving in, but I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this slide anymore. By the end of the week, I sent one final text. "Since I haven't heard back, I've decided to sell the ticket. I hope you understand." Again, no response. With that, I listed the ticket on a reseller site and, thankfully, managed to sell it quickly. The moment I got the notification that it had been purchased, I felt a wave of relief. At least I wasn't out $400 anymore. But alongside that relief was a twinge of guilt. How would this affect my daughter's friendship? Would her friend feel abandoned or betrayed? I pushed those thoughts aside, reminding myself that I had given the mom every chance to make this right. The process of selling the ticket was surprisingly quick. I listed it on a popular reseller site, setting the price at just enough to recoup my original cost. Within a day, I received a notification that it had been sold. A mix of relief and discomfort settled over me as I realized this was officially out of my hands now. I had given the other mom more than enough opportunities to pay, and she had ignored every single one. Still, the guilt lingered. I told my daughter about the sale. She listened quietly and nodded. "I understand, Mom," she said, though her voice carried a slight edge of disappointment. "I just hope her friend isn't too upset." Her words echoed my own concerns. I didn't want this to hurt their friendship, but at the same time, I couldn't keep bending over backward to accommodate someone else's irresponsibility. I reminded my daughter that her friend wasn't at fault and that the issue was entirely with the mom. She seemed to accept that, though I could tell she was still worried. The days leading up to the concert were bittersweet. My daughter's excitement was palpable as she talked nonstop about her favorite songs and what she'd wear. Yet, every time she mentioned the concert, I felt a pang of unease. Would her friend find out she wasn't going only at the last minute? Would this cause unnecessary drama? Despite these lingering doubts, I kept reminding myself that I had done everything I could to make this fair. The other mom had been given every opportunity to pay for her daughter's ticket. She chose to ignore me, and I wasn't obligated to cover her costs. As the concert date approached, I focused on making the experience as special as possible for my daughter. It was her day, and I wanted her to enjoy it without any clouds hanging over the occasion. I hoped the situation would resolve itself without too much fallout, but deep down, I knew it might not be that simple. As the concert day drew closer, the excitement in our house was undeniable. My daughter was practically glowing, counting down the days and talking endlessly about what she wanted to wear and how amazing the show would be. She had made a playlist of the artist's biggest hits and played it on repeat, filling the house with the kind of energy only a 12-year-old can bring. Despite the lingering tension about her friend, I did my best to stay in the moment with her. We planned our outfits together, picked out a few signs to make for the concert, and even watched videos of the artist's past performances. Every detail felt like part of the experience, and seeing my daughter so happy made the cost and stress feel worth it. However, there was still an elephant in the room: her friend. Occasionally, my daughter would mention something her friend had said about the concert, and it was clear she still believed she was going. I debated whether I should ask my daughter to talk to her friend, but I decided against it. It wasn't her responsibility to fix this situation. It was her friend's mother's. As the big day approached, I resolved to focus solely on making the experience memorable for my daughter. I didn't want her excitement dampened by guilt or drama. We even made plans to leave early so we could browse the merchandise booths and soak in the pre-concert atmosphere. While I couldn't shake the small knot of unease in my stomach, I reassured myself that I had handled this as fairly as possible. This was supposed to be a joyful day for my daughter and me, and I wasn't going to let anything take that away from her. The morning of the concert felt electric. My daughter woke up earlier than usual, too excited to sleep in, and immediately started getting ready. Her energy was contagious. She picked out her outfit, a sparkly top and a pair of jeans she decorated with tiny rhinestones, while I made breakfast. As we ate, she chatted nonstop about her favorite songs and how she couldn't wait to hear them live. I had cleared my schedule for the day so we could fully immerse ourselves in the experience. We decided to leave around mid-afternoon to have plenty of time to explore the venue, buy merchandise, and avoid any last-minute rush. It was a rare treat to spend a day like this with her, free from distractions or responsibilities. As we were getting ready to leave, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Her friend still believed she was going to the concert, and I couldn't shake the thought of how disappointed she would be. I wondered again if I should have reached out directly to the girl, but I kept coming back to the same conclusion. This wasn't my burden to carry. Her mom had known for months and had every opportunity to make things right. Once we were out the door, the excitement quickly took over. My daughter held my hand as we walked to the car, grinning from ear to ear. Her playlist was queued up and blasting as we drove to the venue, setting the perfect tone for the day. Whatever challenges had led up to this moment, I reminded myself that I had done everything I could. Now, it was time to focus on the joy of the experience and the memories we were about to create together. After spending the afternoon preparing for the concert, my daughter and I were in high spirits. We had left the house early, eager to enjoy the event to its fullest. The drive to the venue had been filled with laughter, singing, and excitement, and by the time we arrived, the energy was palpable. The thought of her friend hadn't crossed my mind much during the day. I was focused on making the most of this moment with my daughter. But while we were out, something unexpected happened back at home. Around 6 or 7 p.m., long after we had left, my husband, who had stayed behind, heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, he was surprised to see my daughter's friend standing there, dressed and ready to go to the concert. The look on her face, he later told me, was a mix of confusion and excitement. She must have assumed she was being picked up, or had simply misunderstood the situation entirely. He gently explained to her that we had already left for the concert hours earlier. She didn't say much in response, just a quiet, "Oh," before turning around and walking away. My husband said it was a brief exchange, but it left him feeling uneasy. He wasn't sure what else to say to her in the moment. Not long after, my phone started buzzing. It was the girl's mom. Text after text, call after call, her messages became more and more aggressive. She accused me of abandoning her daughter, breaking my promise, and ruining the night. The tone was accusatory and relentless. I only replied once, referencing my final text to her from weeks earlier. "I told you clearly that if the ticket wasn't paid for, I wouldn't be able to take her. I'm sorry, but I had no other choice." Even as I tried to brush off the guilt, I couldn't help but feel unsettled. The evening wasn't supposed to unfold this way, but I also couldn't ignore the choices that had led to it. As my phone vibrated endlessly in my pocket, I realized the situation was spiraling. Each time I glanced at the screen, there was another notification from the girl's mom, calls, voicemails, texts, all with an increasingly accusatory tone. I could feel my stomach tighten, but I chose to silence my phone and focus on the moment with my daughter. This was supposed to be her special night, and I didn't want the negativity to taint it. When I finally had a quiet moment to check my messages, I saw that the texts ranged from angry to outright insulting. "How could you leave my daughter behind like that?" One read. "You promised she could go. I trusted you." Another said. The messages grew more personal as they went on, accusing me of being selfish, inconsiderate, and even cruel. I replied only once, keeping it brief and factual. "I reminded you multiple times over the last few months that I needed the $400 for the ticket. I even gave you a final warning 2 weeks ago, and you didn't respond. I'm sorry your daughter is upset, but this was your responsibility to handle." After that, I didn't reply again. There was no point in engaging further. I had done everything I could to communicate, and at this stage, anything more would only escalate the situation. As I returned my focus to the concert, I felt a mix of emotions: guilt for the girl, frustration at her mother, and relief that I had set a boundary and stuck to it. I knew this night wasn't about their drama. It was about creating a special memory with my daughter. Still, I couldn't completely shake the weight of what had just unfolded. As the concert began, the excitement in the venue was overwhelming. My daughter's face lit up as the lights dimmed and the first chords of her favorite song echoed through the arena. She was fully immersed in the moment, singing along and cheering with the crowd. Watching her joy was everything I had hoped for when I first bought the tickets, and it made the months of stress and frustration feel distant, if only for a while. But even in the midst of the music and celebration, my mind occasionally drifted back to the situation with her friend and the messages I had received earlier that evening. While I didn't regret the choices I had made, the image of her friend standing at my doorstep, dressed and ready, lingered uncomfortably. The thought of how confused and disappointed she must have felt weighed heavily on me. Still, I reminded myself of the facts. I had gone out of my way to give her mom every opportunity to pay for the ticket. This wasn't a matter of forgetting or miscommunication. I had been clear and consistent for months. Her mom had chosen to ignore me, and as much as I wished it hadn't come to this, I wasn't responsible for fixing her neglect. In a quieter moment during the concert, I leaned over to my daughter and asked, "Are you having fun?" She grinned and shouted back over the music, "The best night ever, Mom." Her happiness was the reassurance I needed. Whatever guilt or doubts I had, they couldn't overshadow the reason I was here: to give her a memorable experience. As the final songs played and the crowd erupted in applause, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. The night had been incredible for my daughter, and that was what mattered most. Still, I couldn't help but wonder how the fallout from this situation might unfold once we returned home. The drive home from the concert was filled with chatter and laughter. My daughter couldn't stop talking about her favorite moments, how amazing the artist sounded live, the lights and effects, and the songs she'd been waiting months to hear. Her energy was contagious, and for a while, I let myself be swept up in her happiness, pushing aside the lingering unease about the situation with her friend. When we finally got home, it was late, and the house was quiet. My husband greeted us at the door with a tired smile, asking how the concert went. My daughter launched into a detailed recap, barely pausing to take a breath. I could tell he was happy to see her so overjoyed. But as soon as I checked my phone, the reality of the fallout hit me again. More messages had come in from the girl's mom while we were at the concert. They ranged from furious accusations to guilt-laden comments about how devastated her daughter was. The tone of each one made it clear that she wasn't interested in understanding my perspective. She was only focused on making me feel as guilty as possible. I didn't reply. I had said everything I needed to say before the concert, and engaging further would only prolong the conflict. Instead, I sat down with my husband and recounted the situation, including the moment when the girl had shown up at our door. He listened quietly and shook his head. "You did everything you could," he said. "This isn't on you." His support was reassuring, but I still couldn't help feeling unsettled. The night had been incredible for my daughter, but the weight of the unresolved tension with her friend's family lingered in the back of my mind. Later that night, after my daughter had gone to bed, I sat down with my husband to unpack everything that had happened. The house was quiet, and the buzz from the concert had finally started to settle, leaving space for the nagging thoughts I'd been pushing aside all evening. I began by asking him about what had happened earlier when the girl had shown up at the door. "What did she say?" I asked, though I already knew the gist of it. "She didn't say much," he replied, his brow furrowed. "She just asked if you were ready to leave for the concert. When I told her you'd already left, she looked confused, like she didn't understand. I felt bad for her, but what else could I do?" Hearing this made me feel even worse. The idea of her standing there, dressed and ready, with no idea she wasn't going, was hard to shake. "Do you think I handled this the wrong way?" I asked, voicing the doubt that had been eating at me for weeks. My husband didn't hesitate. "No," he said firmly. "You gave her mom plenty of chances to make this right. If she didn't bother to pay or even communicate, that's on her. It's not fair to you or to our daughter to take on someone else's irresponsibility." His words were a comfort, but I still felt conflicted. "I just hate that it ended this way. It's not the girl's fault her mom didn't pay." "Maybe not," he admitted. But you're not a free babysitter or a bank. You went above and beyond to accommodate them. It's not on you to fix this. I nodded, though the guilt still lingered. At least I knew my husband understood my perspective, even if the situation remained messy. The following day, I braced myself for the fallout. My daughter had the day off from school, so the house was calm, but I couldn't stop wondering how her friend would react. Would she confront my daughter? Would this affect their friendship? The uncertainty was unsettling. When my daughter eventually checked her phone, she saw a message from her friend. She read it quietly, her face shifting between surprise and sadness. "Mom, she's asking why we didn't pick her up," she said, looking up at me. I took a deep breath. "What do you want to say?" I asked, careful not to push her. This was a situation I didn't want her to feel responsible for. After a moment, she replied, "I'll just tell her to talk to her mom." She typed a quick response. "I think you should ask your mom about it." Her voice was steady, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. Her friend didn't respond right away, and for the rest of the day, things were quiet. But later, during dinner, my daughter brought it up again. "I feel bad for her," she said, pushing her food around on her plate. "But I don't think it's fair either. Her mom should have just paid you." Hearing her say that made me feel a little better, even though the situation was far from resolved. I told her I was proud of how she handled it, emphasizing that none of this was her fault or her friend's. Still, I knew this might put a strain on their friendship. Kids don't always understand the complexities of adult issues, and I worried her friend might see this as a personal betrayal. All I could do was hope they'd navigate it with the same maturity my daughter had shown so far. Over the next few days, the situation started to ripple beyond our immediate circle. Word must have spread through the kids, as I began receiving texts from other parents, some curious, others opinionated. It seemed like everyone had something to say about what had happened, and not all of it was supportive. One parent texted me to say they'd heard about the situation and understood completely. "You did the right thing," they wrote. "It's not your responsibility to pay for someone else's child, especially for something that expensive." Their words were reassuring, and I felt a little less alone knowing that some people saw things from my perspective. But not all the feedback was positive. Another parent, someone I didn't know particularly well, reached out with a more judgmental tone. "I heard about the ticket issue," they began. "I get that it's frustrating, but was it really worth upsetting the kids over? Sometimes it's better to just eat the cost for the sake of peace." That comment stuck with me. Was I wrong to prioritize fairness over harmony? I replayed the events in my mind, questioning if there was something I could have done differently to avoid this fallout. But no matter how I looked at it, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. I had been clear from the beginning, and I had given the other mom every chance to pay. If I had simply eaten the cost, I would have been teaching both my daughter and her friend that it's okay to let people take advantage of you. These conversations forced me to reflect on the broader implications of my decision. It wasn't just about $400. It was about setting boundaries and standing up for what's right. While I couldn't control how others viewed the situation, I knew I had acted in a way that aligned with my values. Still, the mixed reactions made it clear that this wasn't as black and white as I wanted it to be. As the days went by, I found myself reflecting more and more on the choices I had made and the lessons I wanted my daughter to take away from all of this. Setting boundaries had never been easy for me, but this situation had forced me to draw a firm line, even when it felt uncomfortable. It wasn't just about the money, it was about self-respect and fairness. I sat down with my daughter one afternoon to talk about it. "You know," I began, "sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good in the moment. It can even make you feel bad, especially if it upsets someone else. But that doesn't mean it's wrong." She looked at me thoughtfully. "So, you think it's okay to tell people no sometimes?" "Absolutely," I said. "It's important to help others when we can, but it's just as important to know when someone is taking advantage of us. If I had paid for your friend's ticket without her mom following through, what would that have taught her mom Or you. That it's okay to not pay people back, she said, nodding. And that you'll just do it anyway. Exactly, I replied. It's not always easy to stand up for yourself, but it's how we show people what we're willing to accept. She smiled a little, and I could tell the message was sinking in. This wasn't just about a concert ticket anymore. It was about teaching her a lesson that I hoped she'd carry with her for life. Even though this situation had been frustrating and awkward, it felt good to know I had used it as an opportunity to show her the importance of setting boundaries and sticking to them. In the aftermath of everything, my daughter and her friend's relationship became noticeably strained. They weren't talking as much at school, and the easy, natural bond they'd shared seemed to be replaced with an awkward tension. It was clear that the situation with the concert had created a rift, even if neither of them explicitly addressed it. I debated whether to reach out to the other mom again, hoping to clear the air. Maybe an honest conversation could help smooth things over. But every time I considered it, I remembered how dismissive and evasive she had been throughout the entire ordeal. Her lack of accountability had been the root of the problem, and I wasn't sure another attempt at communication would change anything. Instead, I encouraged my daughter to handle things on her own terms. If you want to talk to your friend, you should, I told her. But don't feel like you have to explain or apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. She seemed unsure. What if she's mad at me? She asked. She might be, I admitted. But if she's a good friend, she'll understand eventually. And if not, then maybe it's better to have some space. A few days later, my daughter told me she had talked to her friend. They hadn't discussed the concert directly, but the conversation had been polite, if a little distant. It wasn't the warm, giggly exchange they used to have, but it was a start. As for the other mom, I decided to let it be. I had done everything I could to handle the situation fairly, and chasing reconciliation felt unnecessary. Sometimes relationships drift apart, not because of one dramatic event, but because of a series of small choices, or lack thereof. This seemed to be one of those times. While I wished things had turned out differently, I knew I couldn't force a resolution. It was up to them now, both the kids and their parents, to decide what kind of relationship they wanted moving forward. All I could do was hope for the best. As everything began to settle, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the moral dilemma at the heart of this situation. Had I done the right thing? I thought about the $400, money that wouldn't have broken the bank for me, but still felt significant enough to make a stand over. Was it worth the potential fallout, the strain on friendships, and the lingering feelings of guilt? I kept circling back to the same question. Was I being selfish, or was I simply upholding fairness? On one hand, I knew I had given the other mom plenty of time and opportunities to pay me back. On the other, I couldn't ignore the fact that her daughter, an innocent party in all this, had been the one to suffer the consequences. It wasn't her fault that her mom had been irresponsible or dismissive. She hadn't asked for the ticket to be bought on her behalf, nor had she been involved in any of the decisions that led to this situation. And yet, she had been left disappointed, confused, and possibly hurt by what had happened. That was the part I struggled with the most. At the same time, I reminded myself of what I wanted to teach my daughter. Boundaries, accountability, and fairness aren't always easy lessons to learn, but they're important. If I had caved and paid for the ticket, what message would that have sent to her? That it's okay to let people walk all over you if it keeps the peace. In the end, I still wasn't sure. It felt like a lose-lose situation, no matter how I looked at it. But one thing was clear. I had acted with integrity and honesty, and while the outcome wasn't perfect, I knew I had tried my best. Sometimes that's all you can do. So, here I am, laying it all out for you. After weeks of back and forth, sleepless nights, and a roller coaster of emotions, I still can't shake the feeling that this could have been handled differently. Maybe I should have tried harder to communicate with the other mom, or maybe I should have let it go for the sake of the kids' friendship. But at the same time, I can't help but think that allowing myself to be taken advantage of would have sent the wrong message to everyone involved. My daughter, the other mom, and even her daughter. I've replayed the events over and over in my mind. I bought the tickets, trusting that the other mom would hold up her end of the deal. I gave her months to pay, and even sent her multiple reminders. When she ignored me, I sold the ticket, thinking it was the only fair solution. Yet, I can't ignore the way her daughter must have felt. Left out, blindsided, and possibly humiliated. It's not an easy situation to untangle. On one hand, I feel justified in setting boundaries and standing up for what I thought was fair. On the other hand, I can't ignore the guilt that comes with knowing I unintentionally hurt a child. The truth is, there's no perfect answer here, and maybe that's what makes this so hard to process. So now I turn to you. After hearing the whole story, do you think I was wrong? Was I the bad guy for selling the ticket and not taking her friend to the concert? Or was I right to draw the line and refuse to be taken advantage of? I want to believe I made the right call, but honestly, I'm still questioning myself. What would you have done in my shoes? Am I the one at fault here? Or is the blame where I think it belongs? I'll leave it up to you to decide.